So what influence is Trump's speech having abroad? We talked about this with Roe to some extent. I'm joined from Copenhagen by Edward Ashbee. He's an associate professor of business and politics at the Copenhagen Business School. Professor, welcome to the program. I want to begin with the tone, the language, the message. Certainly less combative, less divisive, more optimistic. Does it, in your opinion, mark a shift? And why now, after more than a month in office?
Well, it's certainly a shift, and as you've rightly been saying, it contrasts very sharply with the tone that we saw at the time of the inaugural address. This was, as everybody's been reporting, much more presidential. We're possibly overstating it a bit because expectations for President Trump were fairly low. Therefore, this appears to be a remarkable shift. I would be surprised, though, if Mr. Trump does not at certain points revert to form and go back to a more freewheeling style.
As for substance, Professor, what did you want to hear that you did not?
Well, Bernie Sanders, as you reported, was talking about climate change. There was a lot missing in terms of the detail. I mean, this was a speech designed to appease the different constituencies that put President Trump in the White House. There was a lot there for conventional orthodox Republicans, a lot there to keep House Speaker Paul Ryan reasonably happy. But there was also a fair bit there that played directly to Mr. Trump's base, that base that swung the election for him last November. Infrastructure spending, that emphasis on migration and building that so-called Great Wall. All that is very much directed to the people who swung the election for him. So it was a balanced speech. It was quite a well-crafted political speech in that respect.
And keeping up with his America First campaign theme, speech was almost entirely, Professor, devoted to domestic priorities, not much said on foreign policy. In fact, I counted Iran and China were mentioned only once.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's right. Although what was significant was that affirmation of support for NATO. And that will have been welcomed by many of the major decision makers in Europe. There has been anxiety about the strength, the consistency of President Trump's commitment to NATO. He talked at one point during his election campaign of NATO being obsolete. There's worries about how far that would be carried through into his presidency. Again, he has bowed to orthodox Republicans on this point by saying that he said the word twice, strongly supports NATO.
And Professor, finally, obviously, he outlined ambitious list of priorities, and as you mentioned, thin on detail, no specifics on tax reforms and deregulation, yet the stock market clearly liked what it heard. Dow climbing above 21,000. At last check, it was over 300 points. How much will this market optimism, how long will it last?
Very difficult to tell because, of course, markets are governed by animal spirits, as was said many decades ago. We've seen the markets rising over the last few months. Probably they've got excited by the promise of tax cuts. Probably they've got excited by the promise of infrastructure spending. And at the moment, they're turning a blind eye to the things that they don't like, for example, restrictions on trade. And therefore, I would suspect that we're not going to see this market buoyancy continuing very much longer.
We'll leave it there. Professor Edward Ashbee, thank you so much.